The incredible centaur Fulghor, trapped in the night, abandoned and betrayed by his companions. Who is he? Why is he there? Following the lore of the Night Lords, today's video will dive into this figure, corrupted by darkness and abandonment, yet still seeking the forgiveness of his gods. Exploring possible references behind the creation of this character, and, drawing from Greek mythology, I will discuss Fulghor, champion of the Nightglow. So, let's begin this journey into betrayal and corruption. Fulghor, champion of the Nightglow, or the Dark Drift Knight, is a Night Lord with incredible design, but what might be his origin? What references from software have when developing a centaur, a unique creature full of mysteries from Greek mythology for this game? First, let's look at the etymology of his names. Fulghor comes from Latin fulgor, meaning brightness, radiance, splendor, flame, or glory. Interestingly, in Portuguese, my native language, with its Romance roots, we use the word fulgor to describe a light emanating from the body. It is often a word with a poetic connotation. If we observe his attacks, his weapon, and his affinity with sacred golden light, it is easy to understand why this name was chosen. Even while withering the night, Fulghor still possesses a magnificent glow. As for Dark Drift Knight, it may connect to drift, to move slowly, aimless, to wander away. Again, a fitting choice, because everything suggests that Fulghor, the centaur knight, lost his purpose and his path after being abandoned and betrayed by his companions. Completely desolated, he was embraced by the very knight he once despised. Fulghor, it is an ancient centaur consumed with battle. We know he serves radiant gods who are able to conceal themselves in the roar of the thunder. In the name of these gods, Fulghor undertook a series of quests alongside other centaurs. Probably drawn by the mystery of the night, they set off to investigate its strange origin. It was then that Fulghor was betrayed by his companions, who severed his left arm. His companions abandoned their old gods and embraced the night, their fates unknown. Fulghor fell into despair, alone, abandoned, and had no other way to survive but to walk toward the eternal night, become its prisoner. We don't know how long Fulghor remained in this state, but it was long enough to corrupt his flesh, though not his soul. In place of his severed left arm, a macabre, blackened arm grew, dark as night itself, a claw the centaur uses to attack nightfarers. Fulghor's weakness is lightning, which can be seen as a punishment from the gods for his corruption by the night. Even though he was betrayed by his companions, and even while remaining faithful to the thunders of his ancient gods, the centaur fell, a victim of the darkness. Fulghor also wields a unique weapon, Nightglow, a blade that fuses the contamination of the night with his sacred essence, something the centaur has not forgotten. Then, something different happens. In his ever-dark sovereign form, a new phase of the fight is unlocked, and we see Fulghor in a new way, provided of course that we stop to observe him and consequently die to him. Fulghor has his left arm restored by a golden light descending from the heavens, as if his god had finally heard his prayers and returned his former strength. His appearance becomes cleaner, and he can launch a storm of golden projectiles at the nightfarers. This new version of Fulghor might be interpreted as part of his redemption arc, not so different from what we saw with Ludwig the Holy Blade, though with his own twists, of course. Even though he is still a prisoner of the night, Fulghor is able to call upon his gods and have his honor restored. Whether he wins or perhaps dies in the name of the gods he so deeply loved, he earned his place among those mythical figures he always respected. Since we have little concrete to go on, I wanted to talk about possible references and parallels with Greek mythology. Fulghor's name in the game files is actually listed as Centaurus. Centaurus is the name given to the very first centaur in Greek mythology. But who were these mythological creatures really? The Kendravos were a primitive hybrid race with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a horse. Their faces could be human-like or even have pointed ears like satyrs. They lived in caves, hunted wild animals, and wielded primitive weapons. They were described as savage and violent, more beastly than human. Some centaurs, however, had knowledge of the human arts, most notably Chiron. Their homeland was the forests of Thessaly. It is important to note that the true historical origin of the centaurs was likely the ancient Greeks of archaic Thessaly, who practiced bull hunting on horseback. Riding was extremely common among Thessalians who spent more time in the saddle than on another activity. Now, the mythological origin of the centaurs is far darker. There are many myths, but the best known history is that centaurs were born from the union of Ixion and the nymph Nephele, who was created from clouds. Ixion was once a king of the Lapids who went mad and was exiled from his kingdom. Zeus, feeling pity of him, welcomed him to Olympus. But Ixion showed no gratitude and lusted after Hera, Zeus' wife. Here the stories diverge a bit. Some ancient historians say Zeus grew suspicious and set a trap, creating Nephele in Hera's likeness to see if Ixion would try to seduce her. Others say Zeus wanted to confirm Hera's own suspicions. As in so many Greek myths, violence and forbidden acts lies at the heart of the story. The compendium De Bibliotheca Apollodorus states, "So, Zeus fashioned a cloud to look like Hera and laid it by Ixion's side. When Ixion bragged that he had slept with Hera, Zeus punished him by tying him to a wheel, turned by winds high up in the air. The poor Nephele gave birth to Centaurus, without the blessing of the Graces, a monstrous offspring. There was never a mother or a son like this, honored neither by men nor by the laws of the gods. She raised him and named him Centaurus, and he mated with the Magnesian mares in the foothills of Pelion, from whom was born a marvelous horde that resembled both parents, like the mother below, the father above. In this way, Centaurus, the first horseman, founded the tribe of centaurs. That tribe was nearly wiped out after the Centauromache, the battle between the Lapides and their king Pirithous, aided by the hero Theseus against the centaurs. A passage from Metamorphoses by Ovid illustrates the fury of one of the centaurs, Demoleon, against Theseus and his men. Interestingly, there is even a hero who loses his arm. Demoleon could no longer stand the success Theseus was enjoying. He had been trying with great effort to tear up the solid trunk of an ancient pine. Unable to do it, he broke it off and hurled it in the enemy. But Theseus drew away from the uncommon missile, warned by Pallas, or so he would have us believe. The tree trunk did not fall without effect, since it severed tall centaur's chest and left shoulder from the neck. Finally, I want to talk about Chiron, the most righteous of Kendravos, and one of the likely inspirations for Fulghor. Chiron was different from the other centaurs. He was intelligent, educated, cultured, and kind. The reason was simple. Unlike the children of Ixion, Chiron was born of the union between the titan Cronus, who had taken the form of a horse, and the nymph Philida. Horrified by the form of her child, Philida abandoned him. Apollo, seeing the baby alone, adopted him and taught him music, archery, and medicine. Chiron was always portrayed as a wise and honorable, showing deep respect for the gods of Olympus. He even tutored many heroes such as Achilles and Hercules. One of the myths tells us that Chiron, after being poisoned by one of Hercules' arrows, fell to a fatal and incurable fever. Zeus, moved by pity, transformed him into stars, creating the constellation of Centaurus. Fulghor, in addition to being a skilled warrior, is also an archer and can transform his twin blade into a sort of bow, which connects strongly with the traditional image of centaurs as archers, seen in another constellation in the form of a centaur, Sagittarius. It is curious to note that Fulghor, when launching his bow projectiles, seems to ride through the air, assuming a pose that resembles this constellation. Fulghor's connection to Greek centaur myths go even further. If we think about it, the line, "the mighty radiant gods were able to conceal themselves in the roar of thunder," seems to strongly echo Zeus, king of the gods, ruler of Olympus, tied to the skies, thunder, and lightning. His wrath was feared by both mortals and gods, and it's easy to imagine that deities like him could abandon Fulghor once he was tainted by the night. After all, the gods of Olympus themselves were not known for their pity. Their actions were often cruel and unjustified. It wouldn't be any different with Fulghor. To me, these gods are completely unknown to us in the game's lore, but with Fulghor being a centaur, and with Nightreign suggesting new worlds, nothing makes more sense than to imagine the gods of the Dark Drift Night as being every bit as powerful and as merciless as the gods of Olympus, like Zeus himself. Now, what about Fulghor's dealing holy damage? Why wouldn't that connect to the Horn Sands, the Golden Order, Marika, or the religion we already know from the Lands Between? The fact that he's vulnerable to lightning, wouldn't that bring him closer to the ancient dragons? As I mentioned in other videos, anything is possible in a game that leaves clues through its characters and scenery. What I like to imagine is that the golden symbol of holy isn't something strictly tied to what was shown to us in Elden Ring. Of course, Fulghor could belong to a group of centaurs who lived in the lands between millennia before the Horn Sands, for example. They might even have coexisted with that culture at some point in history. We don't know the true extent of these territories. We don't know the entire history of the lands between. And that's what it makes it so interesting. When a game presents such a vast and rich universe, everything becomes possible. Let's not forget that powerful empires usually erase the history of the defeated, erasing their legacy also. We've seen that with Portuguese colonization in the Americas, with the Roman Empire expansion and its attempt to erase elements of the Germanic cultures, and again, with the Church's efforts to establish a strong, unified Christianity by adapting and transforming pagan elements into its own faith. This is nothing new in history. I could talk about it for hours. That same dynamic is possible in the Lands Between. In a world first dominated by Horn Sand culture, incredibly powerful, and then by the Golden Order, cultures or people seen as inferior might have suffered historical erasure. The centaurs could have had their histories wiped away. One observation: the Pinion folk met a similar fate. An unknown kingdom managed to rob that people of their ability to fly using Ictarus, the cursed weapon. What kind of kingdom would be capable of destroying an entire tribe like that? And as for lightning, there is no indication that thunder and lightning are exclusively tied to the ancient dragons. Again, there's no way to know the true scope and past of the Lands Between, not only the main continent but also the surrounding regions. If the characters and stories from Nightreign can be considered canon with the ancient history of the Lands Between, then that opens up an immense range of possibilities. And I believe that's one of the most fascinating features of Elden Ring. And certainly From Software is well aware of that. Of course, there's also the existence of Dark Souls bosses in the game. And again, I support the idea of fracturing time capable of bringing different realms into that universe, the From Software multiverse. But what about the relic Edge of Order, available after finishing Iron Eye's Remembrance, described as a fragment of the Spear of Fulghor, imbued with holy essence and related to those who live in death? My opinion is that even though those who live in death emerge after the spiritual death of Godwyn, the question of death itself was never truly debated in the Lands Between. Death existed before Godwyn and will continue to exist, regardless of him. The Tibia Mariners, the Deathbirds, the Putrescent's Knight, they are not related to Godwyn, but rather to death in its pure essence. If the centaurs already knew of and hunted beings touched by death, then naturally those who live in death would meet the same end. The Edge of Order would then represent the restoration of order, since to challenge death is also to challenge the very concept of order. Think about how the Greeks viewed the afterlife. Souls would go to Hades, and it was forbidden for the living to walk there, because that would break the established order. When Orpheus makes his journey to the underworld, he does so through catabasis, a descent to the lower world that only a few heroes or divine figures could accomplish, since ordinary mortals would be seized by Hades. Finally, there is Fulghor's connection to the Crucible. This link seems the most plausible to me because the Crucible is a broad term created to explain the primordial essence of life, the original spark of all existence. If, at the beginning, animal traits were common in humans, then the existence of the Pinion folk and the centaurs would make sense and even be respected. To me, Fulghor represents the champion of unknown gods who, although imprisoned by the night, is finally remembered by those same gods who once punished him. In a final moment, Fulghor is forgiven and has not just his armor restored, but his strength, splendor, and brightness, qualities that brought him so close to the gods he loved. If you enjoy this kind of content, where I explore the intersection of video game lore, history, and literature, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye!